Mach 3, give me crew show on 2, 3, and 4.
Show line 1, actually 1.
6, 3. Mach 3, give me start line 2.
5 electric. Mach 3. Line 1.
Mach 3, give me start line 1 and crew show on 7 and 9.
Line 1. Crew show 7 and 9, Mach 3.
Yeah, do something. I hate weapons.
Super Ops, line 3, red ball, avionics.
Super Ops. Line 4 is code 3 for engine vibe.
Fuck.
Okay, so today I'm joined by two guests that are no strangers to the podcast. I have Chief Master Sergeant retired Kurtis Ott, who's been on multiple episodes talking about maintenance culture, resiliency. We talked diversity, I think, in episode 49. My other guest is Kevin Traw, my commander from 2006, 2007 timeframe. He's been on, like 7 episodes, going from squadron leadership to PT, transitioning out of the military. We talked, right? You know, that was a really good one. So if you've been a long time listener to the podcast, you're probably wondering why I haven't had these two together on an episode sooner, but here we are. So today we're going to talk about kind of the relationship between blue collar and white collar, both in the military, but maybe in society at large. And this might also touch on that Nonner episode that I did with Val Rawlings. But it's also what I also want to talk about is kind of some socioeconomic things, and it's not going to be too abstract. I'm going to do some real kind of breakdown different sort of requirements of people existing in their kind of micro societies. You know, again, also I'm a aircraft mechanic. Kevin's a commander, and Kurtis is an aircraft mechanic. So I know it sounds like we're talking about some highfalutin sort of theories, but the reality is we might just be 3 maintainers getting together and kind of just brainstorming on what the fuck's going on. So maybe don't hold us to such a high standard. But I guess to kind of kick it off, I want to talk about a meme that's been floating around social media that kind of shows like this sharp dressed guy walking down the street in a suit next to like a lineman sitting on a pole or something. And it says, you know, the guy on the left is an attorney. He has $200,000 in student loans and makes like $110,000 a year. The guy on the right is an electrician. He has no student loans and he makes $160,000 a year. So I saw that and kind of made me think of this topic because the reality is, you know, aircraft maintenance, even for the chiefs, even for the commanders, and certainly for the airmen on the ground, that's a real blue collar environment. So I guess right off the bat, Kurtis, I'm sure you know you kind of nodded when I talked about that meme. What are your thoughts on that meme?
It makes sense. Mike Rowe goes around the country and he's, you know, talks about the deficit of blue collar workers out there, the skilled tradesmen, and he's right. There's a huge disparity in how many people aren't in the blue collar. I came, as I've explained, I came from a blue collar background. My grandfather was a mechanic. My other grandfather was a farmer. My dad was a butcher, processed meat. And right now, the small meat processors are having a hard time finding people to do the slaughtering for them. And in some cases, they are getting rid of the, in-house slaughterhouse, if you will, because they don't have anybody that will do it. And in my opinion, it's because they don't want to have to work that hard. That's a lot of hard work. And, I would, if I was 25 years younger, probably would be doing that job. However, it is extremely hard on your body. And so when they're saying that these skilled tradesmen are making all of this money, well, they deserve it because, first of all, there's a lack of them. But second of all, you can't do it for very long. My uncle is a high linesman in Minnesota, and his body is ruined, if you will. He's had knee surgeries and hip replacements, and from going up and down poles, and it's hard on the body. So it's kind of like a professional ball player. They demand a lot of money because their run is very short in life, in their life. And that's kind of what a tradesman is. Their run is very short because at the end of 20, 25 years, and that's one of the reasons why my dad sold the business, is because he had reached the point where it was becoming more physically difficult for him to do the job. So I think that's, part of why a lot of people don't want to do the job. But the skills that come from that are, it's incredible. You get a lot of skills. You can do a lot of things. My uncle, there really isn't anything that he can't do because he was on the sites with all of these other trades, and he learned how to do all of these things, build a house and add on and weld and, do brick and mortar and all of that stuff that he learned how to do from these folks out on the job sites. So
Kevin, you did construction before you did ROTC or college, correct?
I was in ROTC, and during the summer I worked construction when I didn't have like my basic training or my advanced training. And then during, Christmas break, because like a lot of colleges, my break was 6 weeks.
It's great, by the way.
That gave me basically, I'll say 5.5 weeks, was so a month to work. Right. So I worked, over Christmas break, and then I worked in the summer. So that probably gave me 14 to 18 weeks each year where I was working construction. I did that from basically as soon as I graduated from high school till I graduated from college. For roughly 4 years. So
you've done like the manual labor portion of construction in your younger years, but also obviously in aircraft maintenance. Even though you're an officer, it's still long hours out on the line. You a few episodes ago, you talked about signing ERs and kind of being involved in the management and that whole maintenance process. So with that background, what do you think of the meme that kind of compares the put together white collar guy with the blue collar guy?
So I interpret it a little different than Kurtis. I didn't interpret it as a justification for why the blue collar should be paid more. I took it as, hey, there's really good paying jobs for blue collar that are and not what people perceive as high paid white collar may or may not be as good. And Kurtis is exactly correct. For a lot of trade schools, if your business puts you through them, right? There's an apprenticeship program. So you will effectively, not only are you not stopping working, right? You're working while you're going through your apprenticeship for, I didn't go through the apprenticeship because they knew I was going in the Air Force, but it was a 5-year apprenticeship. And they were working full time, and they would go to essentially school at night, right? And they had math classes, right? They took tests. So it was very much a school-based activity at night to reinforce. Again, a lot on I'd say the mathematical skills were a big part of what they would have to go to. They also learned, I'll use the term cross training, right? The plumbers would learn a little bit of welding, even though that wasn't their primary field, right? So even that aspect was really good. So, I really thought the meme was saying that there's well-paying jobs out there. You don't have to think about going to school as being your only one. In fact, I'd argue that in many cases, a skilled tradesperson is going to make more than what your average white collar. Certainly a high-end lawyer is going to out-earn, a high-end doctor is going to out-earn a tradesman. But your average tradesman is going to make more than I'd say your average white collar. For sure. I have no doubt about that.
Okay. So my thought on this meme is I think it's dumb because I think it is ridiculously simplistic. Like, to say that, I mean, I'm not trying to like tout the whole attorney thing. I'm just saying any white collar that required going to college. Like, not every attorney out there has $200,000 in student loans. There's a lot of attorneys that have scholarships. They just walk out, or they might be doing the public service loan forgiveness program where they're paying $0 per month and in 10 years of working for the government, which includes joining the military as a JAG officer. You can have all your student loans forgiven. But also at the same time, when they're talking about that big paycheck that lineman's getting, like, yeah, it looks really like, as all of us know that have gone on to the civilian sector to work jobs, and we hear that pay number, you don't really understand all that goes into that number. So when it was touting that the lineman was going to make 120 or 160,000, whatever that number was, that didn't count that you might have been working ridiculously long shifts.
I'm sure it was a lot of overtime, by the way,
or night shifts,
nights
right?
and weekends,
or holidays. Like, how many of the electric linemen during hurricane season are they working 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, forever? And they're making a killing. But that's like, and when Kurtis is talking about his uncle that has like hips and knees replaced, 20 hours in an office or 20 hours working from home is a radically different thing than 20 hours working in a storm, like cutting down trees or putting poles up in dark or with a generator going, breathing in fumes. Like, that's a radically different experience. So when I see that meme so simplified, I always take that meme as it was made by a blue collar person because they felt slighted, or as if society perceives that their job is of a lower status or less important than a white collar job, is how I always took that meme, which I think goes to one of the first things I wrote down, which is I think there's a legitimate stigma, at least in America, maybe Western culture in general, that blue collar is for dumb people and white collar is for smart people. And blue collar is for poor people, and white collar is for rich people. Kurtis.
Yes, that is a stigma that was beginning to gain momentum when I was in high school and in a senior in college, senior in high school. That if I had a lot of friends that went to, a lot of classmates. I shouldn't say a lot. More than half of my class went to college. I went to school to learn how to be a meat cutter. Go figure. But as I was kind of becoming, after I joined the Air Force, I started paying a little bit of attention to, the conversations of going to college and how, that elevated their status, and they started looking more down more upon those who didn't have the education, but also in the jobs that they did. And you don't want to be, well, there's a country music song about it. Mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys. So that's says a whole lot right there, just in those very short words about what it means to not have that education or looking down on that. Now, believe me, not everybody does. That's a fallacy. And when my daughter was growing up, I didn't really care what she did. I told her, I said, you're going to get your first 4 years of education if that's what you want. I said, whatever you want to do is what you will support you on. And it literally was that. Her mother expected her to go to college. Me, I just wanted her to be happy and do what made her feel good about herself. And that would have been whatever it was that she wanted to do. So, and I wish more people would appreciate their kids and not, try and pay, $100,000 to a school just to get your kid into the college that, because they don't have the grades or the SATs high enough to get them in. And right now there's a huge kerfuffle going on out in California over that kind of.
Oh, you mean the admission scandal?
Yeah, the admission scandal.
Yeah. Oh, well, but that's also like, I mean, that's probably like the upper end of the spectrum of what we're talking about, which is literally just rich fucking people bribing people to get their rich kids into rich colleges.
Right.
Which I think we all knew that happened, but it was really interesting to see A, it exposed, and B, watching other people act like shocked and aggrieved that rich people use their money to benefit their kids. Anyway, so Kevin, Kurtis kind of said he agrees. Do you think there's a stigma with blue collar, white collar, poor? One's better than the other. One's educated, one's not educated, and one's rich and one's poor generally.
So I'm not going to say it's Western. I'm going to say it's more U.S. I didn't,
okay.
My 6 years in Europe, I don't necessarily think that they had quite the same view. So I'll say U.S. Western. The second thing is, I think that there's a little bit of that for sure. But what's interesting, I think, because like anything else, we tend to like oversimplify. Right. So it's almost like a false dichotomy to say blue collar versus white collar, because within blue collar, there's skilled and unskilled labor,
mm-hmm.
right?
That's fair.
A lineman, a butcher, electrician, a plumber, people who dig trenches specifically. It's a lot more skilled. Some are extremely skilled, right? Others who just, a truck driver, a lot of skill goes into that, right? If you're simply say, here's a shovel and going to dig a 4-foot hole, and that's your only job, that's a lot less skill. That's different. In the white collar, many of the white collar jobs I call are unskilled white collar or semi-skilled, right? So we have this, it's not like it's either blue collar or white collar, and every person who's white collar is a highly educated middle senior manager. Many what are white collar, if you define white collars being inside and sedentary, which I think is a fair working definition, many of those are not extremely
those are like administrative assistants that file
right.
things, answer phones,
call center operations, right? It's not, and it's, by the way, I also tell people that doesn't equal hard. One of the hardest jobs I had was working at McDonald's for 2 years. I was on my feet all day. It's a lot of work, but here's the thing. I was also an assistant manager by 16. Now, I like to think I was fine at 16, but let's agree that if 16-year-old as assistant manager means, because by showing up and doing a good job, well, that wasn't the case in, say, in the construction where you had to have a lot of years, or in the Air Force, right? So sometimes I tell people, they say, well, this is a hard job. Hard and skill aren't necessarily interchangeable, right? I always tell people is how replaceable your labor is. Well, a lineman and a lawyer are very similar. It takes a long time to get skilled. So I think that's really the debate is almost better on skilled, unskilled versus white and blue collar. But again, I do agree with your summarization
I think you're absolutely right. And I think the stigma is not fair, I'll say.
Right.
I think there is a stigma, but I don't think it's accurate, which is usually how stigmas are, right? They're like generalizations and like categorizing people without consideration for all the kind of nuance and stuff in between. But Kurtis said something. So me and Kevin talked very briefly a couple weeks ago about this subject, about what I wanted to talk about, because it's a little bit different than, most of the podcast episodes where we're talking just more military specific stuff. This is kind of just like social stuff. But I was really glad that Kurtis said, he said, if I was 25 years younger, I would be able to do X, right? And what really got me thinking about this is I talked to you, Kurtis, when we did episode 49. I had just finished my stairs out front. I think 2 weeks later, my back just got wrecked. And I'm 99% sure it was from pouring concrete and doing my stairs and like hauling stuff away, like in those 80-pound bags of concrete, like moving them around. And it really made me appreciate that in a blue collar sort of environment. So I guess we'll kind of define the scope of what blue collar and white collar is going to be here, because as Kevin kind of pointed out, there's really varying degrees in there. I'm going to say in this context, blue collar is going to be skilled labor that is still physical, right? So you're talking the lineman, the plumber, somebody going underneath the crawl space of a house to do some work or something like that, or like your Uncle Curtis climbing up high to take care of that. They're certainly skilled. They certainly have to be smart and competent, but also it's a very physically demanding job, both in hours, what they have to do with the body, shift work, weekends, and things like that. White collar will just say degree required professional sort of something, accountant, maybe beyond what I was in high school. Because in high school, I think I was like a administrative assistant, and obviously I didn't have an education there, and it was just inside. But I think also part of that meme, when I think about it, is most people are not going to become so cognitively disabled they can't do a white collar job. If that if what Curtis was kind of talking about, like if he was 25 years younger, he could do it, talking about his uncles getting hips replaced and knees replaced and things. It's because that job, that skilled labor job, your body it's really hard for you to maintain the level of fitness required for you not to damage your joints and all the things. It's literally the fucking reason my back got destroyed by doing the stairs, because I'm 43 years old and I'm trying to do manual labor and like hard work. And in my mind, I don't think I'm old, but I think, maybe I am a little bit older than I think I am. But so when I look at that blue collar, I think, and for a lot of those roles, plumber or lineman, it's really hard to move from the manual labor portion of that skilled tradesman up into a supervisory inspector sort of role, because I think those slots are really quite limited. And typically when somebody gets in there, they stay in there for a really long time because there's a lot of longevity in it, because they no longer have to use their body. Whereas if you're talking about a white collar job as an accountant, unless they get into a catastrophic car accident or develop early onset dementia or some sort of other catastrophic thing, they're generally going to be able to do a white collar job, even if they lose a leg or, develop other joint issues. They would just, adjust their office setting to accommodate whatever their physical handicap is, but they can still do the majority of what their white collar job is. And I think that's very often overlooked too, especially in that meme where it's a very much an apples to oranges comparison. I think that's really what bothers me about the meme, is it's really hard to compare those two worlds fairly, especially when you're just considering compensation. What do you think, Curtis?
That's part of the problem with why memes are. I'm sorry, why memes are problematic. That's people use memes. I tell people that's the I guess the white collar, that's the uneducated way of trying to prove a point, right? 50, 100 years ago, you had to write an article, or you had to get up and debate someone, or you had to over dinner or lunch have a discussion. That required a much more level of engagement. A meme is for a joke or laugh that is to prove often a political point, that to get clicks or chuckles. That's almost though many of them are funny, right? I mean, I like a jumping cat more than anyone else. I mean, the Real Housewives meme of the cat and the ladies drive me bananas. I love those, right? But it's not a very intelligent way of proving a point, right? So I think, Chris, maybe that's your point. Like, there's really better ways of having a discussion about blue and white collar and values versus like a simplistic picture.
Yeah, I know you want to talk to us. 1 second. So you're right, but the meme is just a manifestation of 2020 like commentary, because
right.
How often did we hear 10, 15, 20 years ago or more, this is the saying that like every maintainer is going to have heard: takes a PhD to design it, a bachelor's degree to fly it, and a GED to fix it. Right? We have Curtis, you've heard that saying?
Yep.
Evan, have you ever heard that in maintenance?
I did.
Right? Okay. So
although I didn't agree with it, but yeah.
What I'm saying is like the meme is just a picture representation of that mantra, right? In fairness.
Yes.
Curtis, go ahead.
Well, I do chuckle at some of the really dumb memes out there. Some of them I look at and I'll analyze it. like this one where, the, guy in line is cutting the power to Joe that couldn't make his bills because he was in debt from college.
Right.
What I'll do is I'll take a look at that, and I'll sometimes what I'll do is I'll go pull up some data, scout out some data to see what's applicable and see what makes sense behind that. How many people are attending, linesman school? How many linesmen are they? What are they actually making in a year? How long do they have to be an apprentice? How many people, have gotten out of school expecting to get a 6-figure job with a bachelor's degree with zero experience? I know somebody who, works for a government agency, and his boss said, we're taking the requirement for a 4-year degree off the list. He said, what I need are people with work experience. We can teach them how to do this job, but what I need are people who has experience working, that know that I know that they're going to show up, not just that they have a degree and that they're going to expect to, be a supervisor straight out of college. And he said that was part of what was the resumes that they were getting were, these folks, and having conversations with some of them, and what their expectations were coming right out of college was, this is not the job for you. What I need you to do is go get some job experience, some work experience before you reapply to come to this department. So,
I also kind of want to address the whole the stigma that somebody that's white collar and professional is smart, and somebody that's blue collar and doesn't have a bachelor's degree is dumb, which is kind of touches on what you talked about, where it's, let's get rid of the 4-year degree. We can teach people. We just need somebody with some experience, that has some work ethic, that can get to work on this. I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of like what intelligence is and what type of intelligence jobs sort of require. Because when I was a 7 level, troubleshooting was the bread and butter of a good 7 level. Like, I'll admit, even to this day, like, I crew jets for 20 years. I got, like, I don't know, my fingers aren't the best. They're big. I can't get into tight spaces. There's a certain amount of creativity to contort your body in such a way to change a part that a lot of it can come with time. But there's like real advanced problem solving skills when you're doing troubleshooting and maintenance. And you would be hard pressed to say that a good troubleshooter is dumb. Like I've known troubleshooters that were not smart. I mean, I don't say that to be callous, but when probed on their troubleshooting theory, it was like not good. Well, I've seen this in the past. Well, how could this relate to it? I don't know. Well, that's not good. That's not a good process you're doing there. But when you're talking about the really intense stuff, working an impound, or certainly when you're talking avionics is blue collar. And there's been times I've been working avionics impounds where I had to read the theory of operation like 5 or 6 times. Like the paragraph, read it and be like, I got like 2% of that. Let me slow down and start digesting these words and read it again and read it again and read it again. And then I'm going to go find somebody that's an expert on it and go, this is what I think it says. Can you help me understand if I'm hearing it right or I'm reading it right? No, you're not quite right. This is what it is. Okay, let me read it again. Let me digest it again. There's no way you can succeed at that and be dumb. So even though you may not have a degree and you might be turning wrenches and being blue collar and working outside and working long hours and doing all these things, you still have to be really fucking smart in order to get it done and be competent and successful, right?
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point about how we define people who are smart. We take are they good in school? And I can give a quick example that I think it's troubleshooting is a version of smart, right? Book smart's a version of it. So my son and I were changing the sprinkler solenoids last year. And he's a computer engineering major, which is half electrical engineering, half computer science. It was great when, I could change the solenoids and do that, which is not very complicated work, but I knew, but he knew exactly how it was worked. Like he knew the inner workings, which by the way, he necessarily couldn't do the mechanical stuff as well, but sure enough, he knew how to make the electricity go and not go and what got it to, which is, as you know, is part of troubleshooting, right? So I think we have to understand that real intelligence is people can apply what they know in different manners. And the two of us working together made it really be much more effective than just say my mechanical skills and his electrical skills. So I think that's kind of reinforcing your point that it's a definition of different forms of intelligence are beneficial. And really what I think that the worst part about maybe looking down at blue collar is it doesn't allow people who are smart to feel like they can go into areas they can achieve. And you try to take that and force it in a different direction. So I think that's the real downside is we don't actually take advantage of the various levels of smartness and how they can apply it because we try to force them down a specific path.
Yeah, that's fair. Curtis?
Yeah, Chris, you and I couldn't go in and design and build, design an aircraft. You and I don't have the background or the education to do that. But we can fix, based on the technical data that's been provided. We can fix it. Okay, somebody had to build it. Somebody had to write the tech data. Somebody had to make sure that information was correct, and that it wasn't going to exceed the design capability of that particular part or airframe. You and I wouldn't know where to begin with that. So there's that level of education, that level of knowledge that is out there that you and I don't possess. It's like my daughter. She has a PhD in biology. Okay, she can't do her job without that degree. She just can't. It takes it to that next level where she has to have all of that background in order for her to do what she does, just the way it is. So, yes, you're correct. When we were troubleshooting and when we were working in pounds and all of those things, you bet you had to have your smart people on it. But it would be different if we had the engineer working on it. And I could go into a long dissertation about when they dropped the B-2 on its wing and what all transpired behind that. A lot of smart people were doing a lot of dumb things.
Well, yeah, and that's a good point too. Like you were talking about, like me and you couldn't go in and design an aircraft from the ground up because we don't have all that background. And yeah, that's something an engineer, you need a buttload of education to get all those things to work. Either from, how many times have you seen an aircraft that has essentially the same part that was just borrowed from an earlier aircraft, maybe tighten it up a little bit, increase efficiency or durability or whatever, but still I'm like solenoids and all those things. It would be really hard for me to design one of those from the ground up. I just don't have it. But you know what? What's an interesting marriage is how many times has a maintainer literally looked at something and went, "What fucking engineer did this?" Like the person that designed this never had to think about the person that had to fix it. And what's really interesting when you see this combination, this marriage of these two worlds, the sort of white collar and the blue collar, is when a maintainer submits an AFTO Form 22. This is this is not a good process. This is not right. We should not be doing it this way. This is a better way to do it. This is from the field. This is what we're going to do. That's that blue collar smarts kind of bleeding over into the engineer side and going, hey, you don't have the hands-on experience to know why your design sucks, but we do. Does this work for you? And when they go, yeah, it does. That's when you're like, oh, and I'll tell you what, that's like the biggest ego stroke when you get an AFTO 22 through, because you're like, I'm smarter than the engineers on this. You just strut for a few days and you work 12s and you kind of forget about it. But, that's a really interesting sort of combination. But, you talked about how your daughter has a PhD in biology, and kind of to circle back around to the stigma conversation. I don't know about you guys, but I don't know when I formed this thought. I don't want my kids to be aircraft maintainers. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying, Kurtis, of mama, don't let your kids grow up to be cowboys. And I don't know many maintainers out there that want their kids to be maintainers. And I'm sure there's some might be listening, but I'm pretty sure those people are in the minority. Like, would you want your kids to be a maintainer, Chris? I know you said whatever make you happy, but I felt very guarded about my kids not going into maintenance.
If she wanted to, I would have supported it, but that wasn't the direction that she was taking as she was growing up in life. So, and maybe she watched me, maybe that was what changed her from any part of that, was she was watching everything that was going on with me. And I don't know. Maybe I'll ask her over Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Kevin, what if your son enlisted to be an F-16 crew chief?
I would be okay with it. That's what we want to do.
Interesting.
It's interesting because he had a friend of his who was looking to go to the Navy. I said, well, let me talk to him. And I had known his friend. Mm-hmm. And I said, let me talk to him. I said, I think I said, what do you want to do? Right. I said, I think they'd be better for the Air Force. I said, I would love for you to go into maintenance, but based on what I think you should do, you should go into comm. I said, mm-hmm. I said, I like maintenance because I said, you're truly making the mission. You don't have to have little slogans like you can't bomb without comm and can't fly without supply. Maintenance doesn't have to have that slogan because everyone knows it, right? But it's funny because I always ask him, I said, how's it going there, Eric? And he goes, maintenance is terrible, right? He said, they're always grumpy and they're always working when everyone else is off. He said, but then no one messes with them. He said, because they move in a pack, and so I think it depends on what the person is looking for in their Air Force experience, right? If someone said, I'm going to go in, I really feel like, I'd say if they really want to learn a good skill, because here's the thing, if you go into aircraft maintenance, you can choose not to be a maintainer. You could choose to go white collar or some other blue collar role and leverage it. But if you go into supply, it's really hard to come out and say, now I actually want to go be a mechanic, right? I mean, the maintenance career field, especially in this case, an 18-year-old, no doors are shut after finishing 4 years of maintenance.
That's
because
fair.
All doors, including like yourself going to law school, remain open. Yes, other career fields don't shut those doors, but it could delay it 3 or 4 years down the road. So
yeah, but I don't see the difference if I was a supply trooper, a crew chief, or comms or dental. All of those would allow me to go to law school.
That would, but I'm saying, but the reverse, if you would say I wanted to continue to do blue collar or technical stuff, I think having been aircraft maintenance gives you a leg up on going.
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah, I never met anybody from dental that went into aircraft maintenance. Now you may get 3 or 4 shots in the comments section about, yes, I was in dental and I became a crew chief. I don't think that has happened.
I never saw any either, by the way.
I think I've heard of. I think one person has. I think one person that actually listens I think it was either on Reddit or somewhere else had commented like, yeah, I was in this and I went to maintenance, and I think everybody was like, why the fuck would you do that?
Well, in the mid 90s, weren't they're forcing people to build before you went in, Chris, but when Chris started, like they forced, like a lot of people got cross-trained to fuels, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So how many of them were other field? But I would say, Chris, at least I do remember that one from early in my career that they did forcibly cross-train. So maybe there's a dental person out there who didn't end up being a field technician.
Yeah. Right. So I want to kind of transition this conversation to something else that's kind of related. And this is the second half. So Kurtis, when I think it was me and you, and we did a podcast probably on resiliency, I was telling you about how I was teaching my daughter how to change a tire, where I was like, go out there. So like if it's, we live in Maine, so there's not a lot of cell service and it gets cold in winter. And if you're on the side of the road, there's no lights. You need to be able to know you don't want to learn how to change a tire at 11 o'clock in the middle of nowhere. So I had her do it. and I had her do it again because I wanted her to become proficient. Now she's proficient at it. But I was thinking, so I sent a clip to Kurtis and Kevin ahead of this discussion, and I'll probably share it. You got to follow the Facebook page because that's where I'll share it when I share this episode. I promise I'll remember. I always say I'm going to share the link, and I fucking never do. So I'm going to try real hard to remember this time. I'm going to write it down on this piece of paper I have here too. It's a clip of Kelly Bundy and Bud Bundy and Al Bundy, where Kelly Bundy's like studying for school, and she's studying with her brother Bud, and her dad Al starts testing her on all these like really sort of detailed, like what's a neuron, what's a neurotransmitter, and she's like, oh, she's doing these really intelligent answers, and Al Bundy's like just flabbergasted, and like, how did you do that? And right when he asks, how did you do that, the doorbell rings, and Kelly Bundy goes, what's that? And my thought on this was, the reason I had that thought is, I wonder, like, I grew up poor, where you have to do all your own things. Same reason why I did my stairs out front, maybe because I'm stubborn. But I wonder, when we're talking about differences, blue collar and white collar, but also socioeconomic things, like the Trump kids, like Don Jr. and Eric Trump and Ivanka, it's a waste of time to teach them how to change a tire. Is that fair? Right? Like, should they not?
I disagree.
All right, you fucker. All right, go ahead, Kevin. Go ahead and disagree.
The reason I disagree is because it assumes that learning to change a tire is only about learning to change a tire, which is a good skill. I view it as it taught your daughter how to have to be self-sufficient, right? Because I really view it as a bigger picture. That taught her how to be self-sufficient, which means, let's say one day she's out on the road and her car doesn't start. She may say, I wonder if it's a battery, right? I think it gives her a little bit of self-sufficiency that, if she's in an apartment or house and something goes wrong, that she could maybe, do that. Like, if you're having, an earthquake in California and your gas line is going off. And I would say, because she learned how to change the tire, she may feel comfortable going out to the gas line and turning it off. Yes, it's a different skill set, but I view that as it's not a waste of time. It teaches someone some self-sufficiency, which I think is a skill set that is important no matter what she does.
Well, I think you're right when you're talking about like that individual lesson. But I guess the point I'm making is, let's extrapolate that lesson of I'm teaching how to change a tire and expand it to, like, as someone that grew up in poverty and someone that grew up like having to figure out all these sorts of things for survival, like as a parent, I'm trying to teach my kids the things I learned. Like, that's, so as a parent, you're trying to, these are all the things I learned. Let me pass along to you. So that way you start out further ahead than I did, because I had to learn a lot of these things either growing up or as an adult. But I think if I teach my kids all the things I learned as somebody that was living in poverty, very little of that is useful information to somebody that will never live in poverty, I guess, is the point I'm making.
So I would say, still don't agree with you, because I would say by definition, you grew up in poverty, you've retired after a successful career in the Air Force, and now you're in law school. So I'm going to say that those skill sets you learned help make you the person you are today, which is arguably successful.
I would argue those skills I learned convinced me to do my fucking stairs and put me on my ass for 5 days.
Okay, it's perspective, yeah. But at least you could do those stairs.
Yeah, that's true. Kurtis, what do you think?
Well,
I mean, do you see the point I'm kind of driving at here?
I absolutely do. I see where you're going with this. Keep in mind, we always want our kids to have it better than we do, in this case. However, what we do for them sometimes is detrimental, because now they're not learning to do it themselves. Mm-hmm. And and I'll agree with Kevin here. You know, you're growing up, built the stair steps to where you are today. Okay. Who helped you in the beginning? Okay. Did anybody help you, or did you learn it yourself? And does that motivate you to be to that be that lawyer that you're looking to be? If we're doing all of these things for our kids, and don't get me wrong, teaching them how to change a tire is great. They need to learn. I had to learn how to do it, and I was taught how to do it. But by expecting, or I shouldn't say, that's kind of a tough word, expecting, by trying to do more for our kids that we didn't have, we're actually putting them at a deficit because they're not getting the same experiences. And sometimes they need those experiences in order for them to be a grown person, to experience it themselves, to let them fail. You know, and as you know, we've talked in the past where we would let that person fail on the airplane so they learned how to do it. And sometimes we need that failure for our kids and those around us to learn. Yeah, we know what the right answer is, but we are, you know, why would we give them the answers to the test when we need their minds to develop to get to that end? And by having, and this is where I agree with Kevin, we need to have Ivanka go out and learn how to change a tire, because it may change something in her thought process later on in life that says, hey, I can change a tire. Wait a second. All of these people are changing tires out there. Why can't we figure out a better mousetrap for tires?
So that's a good point, and it kind of reminds me of what I think it was. It was some election candidacy. I mean, the last 4 years have seemingly been just a constant state of elections and candidacy. So I don't remember which one it was in particular, but somebody asked a candidate how much a box of cereal costs, and what was really funny was they literally could not guess. They were so divorced from what a box of cereal would cost. They probably hadn't done their own shopping in 40 years. They probably hadn't had a need to look at the prices ever. That they didn't feel comfortable answering, because in their mind it could be $1 or it could be $15, and they had no idea where on the spectrum it would have been. And I think there was another candidate that was running for mayor in New York asked how much like a brownstone was in Brooklyn. I think he said $200,000, to which every single person in New York just absolutely laughed their ass off. And I think they ended up not becoming mayor. But it kind of speaks to what you're saying. Like, there's a certain value of understanding more practical lived experience sort of data in order to have a better understanding of the world around you. Is that kind of what you're driving at, Kurtis?
Yeah. Yes.
That's fair.
Absolutely. And honestly, some kids know what they want to do right out of high school. They really do. But the preponderance of the kids, and I'm going to go out on a ledge here and say the majority of the kids that are seniors in high school have no idea what they want to do once they get out. And which is when they graduate from high school. I don't think that unless you know exactly what it is you want to do, you shouldn't be going to college, because my daughter had to teach some of these kids, and she'd look at them and said, why are you here? You know, you obviously don't want to be here. Why are you here? It's expected that I go to college.
You know, that's a good point. There's a kid I know now who doesn't know what he wants to go to college for, but he says he loves working with his hands, right? And so now he's decided he wants to go to school to do mechanical engineering. And he's not super great at math. And the only conclusion I can reach is I think because of his upbringing, it is 100% expected that he will go to college, when I think this goes back to that stigma of the white collar, blue collar, educated, uneducated, and all those things. I think he can't, in his like family dynamic, social dynamic, he can't become an ASE certified like Mercedes technician, which, by the way, I think those guys make an absolute killing on money too.
Chris, you bring up kind of a good point. You're right about the technicians. That I think also, let's call it a reverse. People say, oh, what people have gone to school, they have no common sense. So I use my son, who definitely in many ways have common sense. But, he, a few years ago, he decided during the summer, he was going to order old broken down gaming systems and then resell them. Mm-hmm. And he would work in our garage and he would solder. I'm telling you, that was a hard skill set. I mean, he had to troubleshoot because he couldn't afford to send it to someone. He had to get the thing. He had to troubleshoot what was wrong. He had a meter out there. He had to say, this is what's wrong, and then fix it. Sometimes it was sound. Sometimes it was the motherboard. Yep. And they had to put it back together. They had to sell it. Right. So conversely, it's I encouraged him. He said, Dad, I made like $5 a piece. He said, it's not about the $5. I said, you had to learn troubleshooting skills. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think we also shouldn't reverse just because someone says a certified engineer that, I would probably put his troubleshooting skills probably some of the maintenance people. Like, my son knows how to troubleshoot, especially when it comes to electrical. Yep. Just because he's a high achieving engineer, he actually also can do practical troubleshooting. Now, maybe not like you encourage, where you guys could also maybe go do something mechanical where he would maybe struggle a little bit more about that, but he definitely has to follow the skill sets of troubleshooting. So again, I think it's identifying people can be successful, but the example you brought of your friend is for sure correct. And by the way, if he's not good at math, he's going to struggle as a mechanical engineer because it's just a requirement for the job. Yep. And it's unfortunate because if he gets through, he may not love it. Yep. And if he doesn't get through, he's going to feel like a failure if he could have gone through let's say a highly educated, skill force, like a car mechanic, that probably would have been a perfect mixture of unless his real desire, he likes design work, where then maybe, that pushes him a little to the engineering where he could be someone in the design stuff. And if he loves it, he'll get a tutor and he'll say, you know what, in those classes, I'll get the C and the other stuff I'll excel at.
Well, I think there's and I think probably every family, I don't know if suffer is the right word, is afflicted. That's still not the right word. Every family experiences, I think, or at least parents, where, like what Kurt said, you want your kids to do better. You want your kids to go out and do bigger things, whatever that bigger thing is. It doesn't have to be, in the same arena or even in a different arena. It's just, you're trying to springboard them up. That's literally what generational wealth and generational growth kind of talks about, right? Like, let me set up my kids so they can do something bigger than me, and then they'll have kids and they'll do bigger than them. And that's how essentially we all make the world a better place. That's literally how that works, right? The whole world kind of moves up together. But the inverse of that is, I think there's a real sort of pressure against seen as moving down that ladder. Like, if your parents are educated or doctors or whatever, and then you become a car mechanic, like, that is not acceptable for a lot of parents for their kid to do.
But that goes back to the societal comment you made earlier, that we've made it that way. I know with my father, he kind of, I guess, tried to have it both ways. In a good way, he said, you have to go to college. He says, but when you graduate, he said, you can do whatever you want, including being a mechanic. So his thought was, go there.
Because he saw the value that it could open doors, probably.
Right. But he says, you can go down any other route, right? That was just how he kind of viewed it, that you can always decide to go be a mechanic, or, I strongly considered at one point, I like maybe finishing college and going into doing construction. If I could have gone reserve in the Air Force, I may have done that. But that really? For Air Force ROTC, that was an option. Army ROTC you could, but Air Force, you have to go on active duty. So I said, well, that's what I want to do. So I think if I would have had the option, I may have strongly considered it, because I really enjoyed the work. And for people who say it's not hard mentally, that they've never done it.
Yeah.
I mean, roughly what it added up to is the apprentices went to over 2 years of what would be like college level work.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to do it. But they're also working on the side. And it was very, very difficult. So again, I think it's, as a society, we've done a poor job of defining. We have a very narrow definition of success.
I think that's probably the best point. And that
definition of success does not really help everyone. And I think it ends up people in jobs that they're unhappy with. I think that's one reason we've seen maybe a lot of resignations right now. I think with COVID, there's been a lot of just normal reassessment after it used to happen in the olden days after wars, right? That would oftentimes, I think part of it is people realize they weren't roles that they were happy with, right? And my hope is that they're saying there's a lot of open truck driver positions. So someone was in maybe a white collar, says, you know what? I don't like being a cubicle, but I love being out on the open road. Now they'll find out getting certified as a truck driver is not as easy as they think.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping as part of this, maybe this will give an assessment of how people define happiness. Maybe part will be doing jobs that they define as being necessary and happy versus what someone else defines as being necessary and make them happy.
Yeah. Kurtis?
I agree.
No. So go ahead. Sorry.
Nope. I'm just agreeing.
Okay.
Yep.
So how much, so I think we've kind of honed in on something, and I'm interested in both you guys' thoughts. So we talked about the stigma that I think is in America, especially, as Kevin pointed out, of white collars is somehow seen as better than blue collar, and white collar is seen as more affluent, and blue collar is seen as less. How much do you think, or we talk about how your kids have to do, the idea is your kids have to go higher or better than you. How much do you think all of this has played into like ballooning student loan debt that's been going on in America the last 20 or 30 years, beyond just the cost of college kind of coming up, but like how much of these social sort of pressures that are just kind of like the undercurrent, how much do you think that's driving it?
I would bet it's driving the preponderance of the, what is a $1.8 trillion deficit.
I know it's
now
over a trillion. Yeah.
Oh my God. But it never used to be like that. There's a series of reasons why it's that way. And anytime that the government says we're here to help, there's going to be money that's going to be abused along the way. But when the expectation of just about every household is that your child goes to college, and most of the middle America can't afford college.
Yeah.
That's where that overwhelming debt comes in. Gosh, Mike Rowe's he's got a long road to hoe, but he's out there almost every day beating the drum to get people into skilled labor schools out there. And, I see him frequently talking about it at just about any venue that he possibly can. And he's, of course, he's very outspoken about it. And, he's done a lot of the head work, if you will, on why the deficit is what it is. He's done a lot of stuff in there. And so when I listen to him, all I can think is, there's real money in doing these skilled labor jobs, these blue collar jobs. In fact, there's plumbers out there that are making, $85,000, $90,000, in the first couple of years that they're working, and it's just because there's nobody out there doing it. I had 4 guys come out here and replace my air conditioner. And they were, I saw that one guy and he's driving a pretty nice car.
Yeah.
Pretty nice car, and lives in a pretty nice house. And he's, young enough to be my son.
You know, and also like I know none of us are like experts on anything outside like maintenance in our careers or anything, but so it's like more just speculation and thoughts like that. But Kevin, what do you think? Like obviously there's probably a lot going into why student loans are so high, but how much do you think is just the stigma and social pressures and like that?
So I'm going to actually
Biases?
talk a little about social pressure. So not to repeat what Curtis said, 'cause I agree with him, but I think there's been one other thing. We also decide not only do you need to go to college, you have to have certain college experience. And I actually think that's a big driver, because here's the thing. If someone, and I'll use California where I'm most familiar, if in my opinion, if your goal is to go to college, and you're a California resident, there's no reason you should leave the state. California has two fantastic university systems and a fantastic community college. And I will see people go out of college to go to a college is not as good so they can have the college experience, right? So I think part of it too is not only would say you need to go to college, but some reason you need to go 3,000 miles away to get. Now, understand if you're like in North Dakota or rural California where there's not a school nearby and you should go in state, but it's just amazing and that takes what maybe would be an expensive experience, right? Because most states, if you live near your college, you could probably in 4 years go through school and 40, 50, 60,000 for the tuition, right?
Yep.
But as soon as you go out of state and live away, that goes to 250,000.
Yep.
So I would probably guess that as much of the driver is not just simply going to college, which I certainly agree with Curtis as a driver. I actually think it's because we say you need to go away for school. And that really is where you get that explosion of cost, because it's so much more expensive to go out of state. And then once you go out of state, you automatically can't live at home. For those that can live at home, you automatically live on your own, right? And that drives up those costs. I think that is much, again, to your point, I'm not an economist, but I would think that there's a decent amount of that student loan debt is simply because they had to go out of state for the quote unquote experience.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. But I mean, obviously there's in-state tuition, which is always cheaper.
Always cheaper.
If you can live at home, that's going to be cheaper.
Always
You
cheaper.
might have a job from high school that you can return to in the summer, or like you did in the winter break and make money to offset. I think those are all good points. And I think there's also just I don't know. I mean, I have nothing to base this on. I think there's also just in America, in our society, there's an acceptance of student loans. Like student loans are a foregone conclusion. You are going to graduate with debt. Everybody does. It's normal. And I think it's become very laissez-faire about reducing that burden.
And that brings on another thing where the laissez-faire of being in debt. Okay. All right. Well, it's just not something that, somebody's going to come behind you in your future debt and pay your future debt. You have to learn that the debt that you incur has to be paid. It's going to be paid. And if it's not paid by the person who is, getting the education, there's a bad precedence that's being set with that individual. Now, not all of them. Some of them got their heads screwed on straight, but some of them are going to look at that and say, well, somebody's just going to pick this up for me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to worry about it. Debt's a debt, and everybody's in debt.
Yeah, I think that's the piece too. It's like everybody's in debt. I think it's very normalized.
Yeah.
I was going to say
Especially
it's not just student loan. I say that's
fair.
Americans, at least, I don't know, post World War II have always been, and certainly probably post Vietnam, have been very debt driven, including not just people, U.S. corporations have been the same way. And guess what? The U.S. government has followed the same route, right? I mean, I often tell people that problems in the U.S. are equally shared by the people, the government, and the businesses, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair too.
None of them are probably more or less dastardly than the other. They've all contributed to the ills that we either have or don't have today. Okay,
well, I think with that, we're probably far enough removed from the starting topic that we could probably wrap up. I guess, first of all, I really appreciate you guys' time. I certainly appreciate Kurtis doing this on the fly without any sort of notification of what it's going to be about. So very impressive, Kurtis, that you just rolled with it and killed it. But also, like, this was a topic that is probably a little bit outside of our normal sort of discussion. I mean, it's probably, tangentially related to aircraft maintenance and military service just because of the nature of what we were talking about. But I guess, is there any final thoughts, Kurtis or Kevin? We'll start with Kurtis.
No, it was a really good conversation. I saw some different perspectives that hadn't entered my mind, and so now I'm going to go back and I'm going to do some looking into some of this stuff that I don't really know right off the top of my head, and it's a shame that I don't. And yeah, my daughter and I were going to have a little chat over Thanksgiving over why she didn't want to go into the Air Force, which neither here nor there, but I'd like to know what her perspective was. Was it because she was watching me, or was it she established her own opinion?
Did she explicitly say she didn't want to, or did she just go to college and made her own path?
I don't ever remember her saying she didn't want to, but when she got into school, she took on the direction of biology, and not a lot of, research biology goes on in the Air Force.
That's fair.
So I don't know if that was ever a conversation, but it's going to be over Thanksgiving.
Kevin?
And I'll try to tie it back to the military and say that I think some of the same headwinds we see getting people to blue collars, maybe some of the same headwinds we see people recommending the military. For some reason, people have a stereotype. You could probably do a whole podcast on military stereotypes, most of which are not true, right? So I think that sometimes people actively discourage people going to the military for the reason they actively discourage blue collar, because they have a perception that's far from reality. So that's my attempt to try to turn it back to how this fits the military. I think you see the same thread on people, except for there's small groups say they don't like the military because of the mission or they had a bad experience. I think it's the same thing. Well, somehow people go to the military, they're not smart or they're in trouble. I think you can replace military
with blue
collar, and almost see the argument or discussion is very similar. So I think based on Kurtis, he can see where I'm going with that. And so, I think that's how it does relate. Maybe future podcast, us or someone else, about military stereotypes and how they're not necessarily mostly accurate.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. Well, my dog is telling me that she needs to go out. So I guess the podcast is over. Thanks, both of you guys. And adios.